Today we are in our final installment of our Blessed series. This has been, in my mind, probably one of the most significant series I've preached through. I'm thankful for Pastor Luke and Pastor Caitlin for them walking through these amazing ideas that Jesus gives us in the introduction to this huge sermon about how followers of his are supposed to live. And what he says to them is, you are blessed. This idea of happiness, joy, fulfillment, if you live out these particular standards, these particular spaces and promises will come from living those things out. That you'll live a life that is as good as it gets because it's in Christ. Last week we talked about salt. This idea that the church, the followers of Jesus, are actually the preservative agents of the world. That as the world decays out, the church has actually been put in there to cause it not to decay, to preserve it. The church has been inputted, you and I have been inputted in the world to bring flavor to the world. And today we are talking about light. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, as a young boy, as a picture of me as a young boy, right here, fantastic. I was a hipster before hipsters were a thing, okay? I was a trendsetter. I'm probably around 7 or 8 here, and you know, at the time, there was a particular show that came out that was life transforming, okay? I'll say it, and you'll go, yes, you'll agree with me. It was Star Trek: The Next Generation. I told you. We're even getting claps back here. It's amazing. To this day, I believe Jean-Luc Picard is still the best Star Trek captain on the planet. Anyway. But I remember watching the show, and there was a measurement that they kept talking about that was really confusing to me as a 7 or 8-year-old. It was this idea of light year. I didn't understand it. Like, what is this thing, light year? And the older I got, the more I learned about it. It's actually quite fascinating. It's this idea that light takes a certain amount of time to go from where its source is to the space where it is seen. So at night, when you look out into the vast distance of the sky, it's not dark. I mean, there's darkness. But you see all of these amazing points of light everywhere. And scientists, astrologers would say that some of those points of light are like in the millions, hundreds of millions, billions of light years away. Meaning that from the source, it has taken several billion years, million years, hundreds of million years for us to see the point of light. That's an amazing idea, isn't it? It kind of blows your mind. Like when I think of space, I realize how small I am. But I mean, those measurements, that stuff, I mean, realistically, we don't really understand it. So let me put it into just a context that makes more sense to us. In our solar system, there's this thing called the sun. And the sun radiates light, and that light causes all of life to grow, doesn't it? Plants are dependent on it. You and I are dependent on it. Animals are dependent on light. I mean, we schedule our days based on daylight coming from the sun. This is how fast it's traveling, okay? I just want you to know. The sun is 93 million miles away, or in kilometers, 149,600,000 kilometers away. That's insane when you think about it. Now, let's say something cataclysmic happened, apocalyptic, and the sun stopped shining. From that distance, it would take us 8 minutes and 20 seconds to know that the sun went out. Think about that. 93 million miles, 149,600,000 kilometers away. Light is traveling so fast that it would take us 8 minutes and 20 seconds to know that it got snuffed out. I mean, light is what causes most things to grow, like I said prior. Light is so important, and if we didn't have it, it would literally affect every single part of our lives, wouldn't it? And in today's passage, Jesus says this about his followers who are sitting right in front of him. He says this, Matthew 5:14-16. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Now, you got to remember who he's talking to. Jesus is speaking to a ragtag group of misfits. I mean, these people are tax collectors, fishermen. They are literally the people that should stay on the periphery of society. And he looks at them and says to them, you are the light of the world. In that particular society and culture, the only people that ever got that title were very religious, very special leaders. So there are many rabbis for their contributions to Jewish society, for their contributions to thought, to philosophy, and to religious theology. They would be called the light of the world. And here's Jesus saying this to a bunch of people that really should not even be following him. What's interesting about his statement is that light is very distinct from darkness. And also, the presumption is that the world is in what? In darkness. By definition, darkness is the absence of light. And what Jesus is saying to them is that you are distinctly different. You're supposed to be a distinct, different person, different entity than the darkness that is surrounding the world. That you are the one that's going to bring something illuminating to the darkness that surrounds you. There's no mistake about it, right? Like, you can't confuse darkness and light. It's either one or the other. And even you could go at me and say, well, what about a dimmer? Okay, first of all, those were cool in the 80s. All right, let's just say that. But a dimmer even, the idea is that you're putting in light slowly. But you're still infusing darkness with light, and you're beginning to see all kinds of stuff. Like, make no mistake about it. You can't confuse darkness with light. You just cannot. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying to his disciples. You are the ones that are going to be implemented into the world, and you're going to be so distinct and so different that there will be no mistaking who you are versus what the world is. You see, shining your light is something you either fulfill or you fail at. There's no in between. Just like salt being salty, you can't have salt that's kind of salty. Jesus is saying to his disciples, look, I know everything that I've just said to you. And remember, the Beatitudes are an introduction to a bigger sermon. And so here he is saying, blessed are you if all of these things. Blessed are you if these things are happening. Great. And then the last one, he goes to this climax and then he drops it to, blessed are you if you are persecuted for righteousness. Well, that's awful. Like, what kind of sermon is that? You want to leave people on a high. And here he is introducing this whole thing of a blessed, happy, joyous life and then dropping it at this point of persecution. You're going to be insulted. People are going to abuse you. Oh, and by the way, people are going to lie about you. Fantastic. I want to sign up for this. But then he gives them some encouragements. You are the salt. But also, you are the light. You are the ones that are going to illuminate the darkness. And it's something that you either fulfill or you fail at. He then goes on to say this. A city on a hill or a town on a hill cannot be hidden. In those days, many of the cities within Israel were put on the sides of hills or on the top of hills. And there's no Uber, there's no Greyhound bus, there's nothing going on at this particular point in time. So if you're traveling through Israel, you're going either, you're a pregnant lady on a donkey or you're walking. And there's no Holiday Inn to stop and be like, well, I'm tired. I'm going to stop here for the night. Sometimes there was not that. And so people had to get to where they were going, which meant that at times they had to actually travel at night. And so as they're walking, you can just imagine, I mean, there's lions, tigers, and bears, oh my, everywhere. There's all kinds of stuff happening. There's robbers. There's people trying to get your money from you. You're walking around in the dark. You're trying to figure out where you're headed. Then all of a sudden, you would see in the distance this light shining, almost like a lighthouse, right? I'm from the Maritimes, and so lighthouses are everywhere. Well, that's the idea. Here are people traveling, wandering around in the dark, and here is this point of light that can lead them to a better path. And that's what Jesus is saying to his disciples about them being light, is they need to shine so brightly that they actually illuminate a different path for people. Yes, of course, to God. I understand that, right? That's the easy go. But if you read the whole book of Luke and you look at the book of Acts, those are two parts together. Jesus is described as a spirit-empowered, fully man, fully God, but spirit-empowered. And here he is walking around showing us what being human should actually look like. And Jesus is saying to his disciples, you need to be like this city on a hill that is shining so brightly that when people come into the distance and see you, that you begin to lead them to a different path. And all these folks that are wandering around in the dark traveling, when they see light, what do you think they're thinking? Okay, I can get food, there's safety, maybe put my head down. I mean, literally, it is way better to go over there than it is to stay in the middle of the dark. And Jesus is saying, that's what I want you to be like. Wherever you go, however you are, whatever place and space you find yourself in, if you're my disciple, you are called to be light, somebody that shines so brightly that you illuminate a different path for people, a better way. And it's so attractive, and it means so much security and so much fulfillment for folks that they are willing to get off of the path that they are to go towards where there is light. He then ends it off like this. He says this. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before men, for others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. You see, shining your light helps people to see the splendor of God. What do I mean by that? Well, he's making a point, right, again, about not hiding. You can't hide a city on a hill. You can't do it. But also, if you have light, why would you illogically put a bushel over it or a basket over it? It makes no sense. Light is not there to be hidden. It's there to illuminate. And it even says, it'll illuminate the whole house for everybody. So put it on its stand and let it shine, and people will see what? Your good deeds. And they will glorify God because of your good deeds. Well, why deeds? And this gets very confusing, right? Because we go through this space where we're like, oh, well, you know, I'm saved by grace through faith, not by works. So I'm good. I'm good. Don't worry. I'm good. I got Jesus. I'm not saying you don't. But you notice that in the end, in the book of Revelation, God judges people, Christians, based on their faith or on their deeds. Deeds. And why? Well, let me tell you why. Because your deeds are a direct reflection of what is actually in your heart. It is the outflow of what you actually value and what you believe. So as you're letting your light shine, it's an inside-out thing. It's from the inside out. It's coming out and it's permeating every deed that you do on a daily basis. And that, Jesus says, is what people will see. That's what will attract them to the realities of who God is. And you notice, they will glorify God in heaven because of the good deeds that are coming from the inside out of you. It's because you're representing God. This is the opportunity. Shining your light is the opportunity for people to see what God is actually like through your life. And if that feels like a heavy burden, it should be. You should feel it. Because it's a big responsibility. You see, God doesn't have a plan C, D, even B. His plan for the world is the local church. is people like you and me sharing the good news of Christ in the middle of where we are all of the time. But here's the deal. We can do a really good job at holding up placards and screaming at people and telling everyone how they're going to hell. And they can look at our lives and think, that is a very sad person. Because of the way that we treat the people in our lives on a regular basis, because of the way that we treat folks that we don't even know, because we look at people of other religions and other faiths and other sexual orientations, and all of that stuff. You might disagree, you might not necessarily have the same viewpoints and all that stuff, but the way that you interact, the way that you live out, the deeds that come out of you should reflect the glory of God that is inside of you. And that is what will cause people to say, oh, their God is pretty amazing. Look at them. And it gets very confusing sometimes because we're like, well, yes, we have to stand for things. Absolutely, you got to stand for stuff. But the way you do it matters. And what Jesus is saying to his followers here is, let your light shine. But your light, as it shines, has the potential, the opportunity for people to see the splendor of God, to show people what God is actually like. When you look at the Old Testament, you read things like, don't take God's name in vain. Okay. Cool. Don't say Jesus or God or any of those things in a sentence. I understand. And there is part of it that is that. But more so, what God is getting at in this idea of taking God's name in vain is, don't do anything that would misrepresent me. So, when you're walking around and you're in, a superstore and the cashier is giving you a bad attitude and you're screaming at her, that's actually taking God's name in vain. Because you're misrepresenting the God that you say that you serve. And Jesus' whole point is, you and I have the potential of showing people what God is really like through our lives, through the deeds that are inside out of us. If we would let our light shine. If we wouldn't hide it, but that we put it on a stand and let it shine and show the world, and our God is good. So how are you supposed to let your light shine? I mean, there are so many different opinions about this, right? Because people want to get really, really nitpicky about what does this look like? Where do you go? People want to interpret this in, well, what does shining your light look like for you? And we leave it up to everybody's interpretation. Here's the joy of the Bible. If you read it in context, you'll figure out what Jesus is about to say. Like I said prior, the Beatitudes, this part of salt and light is really there's a bigger sermon that is to come. And what I love about Jesus is that he doesn't just say things like, be salt, be light, go. Like, it doesn't look like the life of Brian at all. You know what I mean? Jesus, in the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, actually defines how you and I should be salt and light. Later on, in Matthew 5:20, he says this to his disciples, and I think it's pretty poignant. He says, for I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, the last several weeks we've defined what righteousness is. If you look at the Beatitudes, those first four are states of emptiness, meekness, right? Mourning, hunger and thirsting. I mean, it's a state of loss. It's a state of being empty. Then you get to the point where it says, those that hunger and thirst for righteousness, they will be filled. Then you look at the next four. The people that Jesus is talking about are filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. How do you give out mercy unless you're full of it? The purity, those that have pure hearts. Well, how can you evaluate your motivations? Like, to be pure in heart means that you actually have to be pure. So you're full of it. Peacemaking. Blessed are the peacemakers. Well, how can you give out peace unless you've got it? And then, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Well, why would you get persecuted for righteousness? I mean, these people are so full of righteousness that they're getting persecuted because they're making other people evaluate their own lives. I mean, that's pretty amazing. They're all states of fullness after the fact. And so, when you look at it, The way Jesus is defining righteousness is mercy, purity of heart, and peacemaking. Mercy, purity of heart, and peacemaking. Well, let's go through chapter 5, 6, and 7. It'll be really quick. But let me show you how all three of these components are in the rest of the Sermon on the Mount. So chapter 5, verses 21 to 26, murder versus anger. You've heard it said, don't murder. I say to you, watch your anger. Verses 27 to 30, adultery versus lust. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. I say to you, watch your heart when it comes to the way that you look at people lustfully. Casual divorce versus covenant commitment in verses 31 to 32. Don't just get frivolously divorced. Be true to the covenant commitments that you have made. Verses 33 to 37, making oaths versus being a person of your word. My people, Jesus says, don't need to go around swearing a bunch of things. All they need to do is say yes and no, and that's good enough. Revenge versus turning the other cheek. You don't need to go looking for revenge. You've heard it said, eye for an eye. I say to you, turn the other cheek. Love our neighbor versus loving our enemy. Anybody can love their neighbor, Jesus says, but what I want you to do is, love your neighbor, but also love your enemy. I mean, look at these. These are some of the most practical things you and I could do. But isn't it funny how we went through the Beatitudes, we got to salt and light. Jesus then says that your righteousness has to be elevated over that of the Pharisees, Sadducees, and teachers of the law. And then he goes into the practicalities of how. And look at the hows. Murder versus anger. Emotional regulation matters. Right? We don't think of it from a spiritual standpoint, but like the way that you control your emotions, hello, it's right here. Take care of your anger, otherwise you'll kill somebody. Make sense? Right? It's not brain surgery. Adultery versus lust. I mean, this is a statement about sexuality overall. Are we willing to fetter our sexuality? And Jesus says, that's what I want from you. Casual divorce versus covenant commitment. Are you willing to stay true to the commitments that you have made? His people, he's saying this. I want you to be a people that work it out, that work hard on your marriages to make sure that you're not just frivolously getting divorced for no reason. Like, work hard at it. Making oaths versus being a person of your word. Make sure that you just are a person that says what you'll do. Don't be somebody that looks for revenge. Turn the other cheek. Forgive people. And then love your neighbor. Yes, but more so, love the people that hate you. Have open arms to them. Go the extra mile for them. This is what being light looks like, church. This. We do things in church life all the time. Say, I just want to go deeper with Jesus. Ooh, I want to know his presence. I want to experience him. Are you doing this stuff? Because if you're not, don't expect anything more. Because it's cute. Yeah, I want to soak in his presence. Okay, cool. Can you actually stay true to your covenant commitments? Are you watching your lust? Are you emotionally regulating yourself? Because you can spend all your time at an altar and worship Jesus for hours on end, but then you go home and scream at your kids because you can't keep your stuff together. And Jesus is saying, this is what matters. This is how you are light in the world. And let's be honest, this is tough. I mean, this is not easy. Chapter 6, this is what he goes at. Ready? Verses 1 to 4, giving to the needy without any recognition. Verses 5 to 15, prayer for the reward of relationship with God, not the recognition of others. Fasting without recognition in verse 16 to 18. Verses 19 to 24, treasures in heaven, idolatry of money. You can't serve two masters, either money or God, one or the other. Verses 25 to 34, do not worry, trust God to take care of you. I mean, look at these. The first three are really all about your motivation of heart when it comes to your spirituality. Jesus is literally breaking down a whole system of religiosity that says, look how great I am because I'm spending all my time in the temple, I'm spending all my time praying, I'm spending all my time in pomp and circumstance, I'm looking really good. And he's like, that doesn't matter to me. You know what matters to me? That it actually is genuine. That you're doing it without recognition, that you're giving because you want to give and because it's something that you're led to do. And you're doing it without your right hand knowing what your left hand is doing. I want you to pray for the reward of knowing me, not so that people tell you how spiritual you are. I want you to fast because it's about my relationship with you, where you are learning how to depend on me. I don't want the whole world to know that. Watch your motivations. And then he goes after money. And come on, he says a lot about money in the Bible, okay? Money's a difficult one because our hearts are lent so towards it. Think about North American society. I mean, forget North American society. I mean, let's be real. I'm half East Indian. Indians love things, okay? We do. We do. We love it. And that's not just a statement about Indians. That's a statement about Filipinos. It's a statement about Africans. It's a statement about literally every society on the planet. We like stuff. Why do you think that the trade war between America and China is a big deal? Because it affects our stuff. Right? Go to Canadian Tire. Find something made in Canada. Majority of it is actually made in China. So obviously it's like, oh, yeah, this is a big deal. Of course it's a big deal. Go to the dollar store. Everything there is made in China. So of course it affects us because it's our stuff. But Jesus says very clearly when it comes to money, you can't serve both. You have to make a choice. You have to choose that God is going to be your sustainer. He's going to be the one that gives you what it is that you need, that you're going to find your source in him. Then he goes into this idea of not worrying. Look, the rest of the world is worrying about where they're going to find food and where they're going to find clothes and all that stuff. He says, look, are the birds not taken care of? Are the flowers not taken care of? If these things are taken care of, how much more then is God going to take care of you? Do you see how radical this is? Do you see how different this is? When you live this out, you are shining light into the darkness of our world in a way that absolutely makes no sense to them. And it seems easy, but let's be real, this is hard. I drive around in a car that cost me $1. And it is ugly. And I have to fight all the time this idea of, yeah, I actually do want a nicer car. Not because it's for more practicality issues, but because I got to get to where I'm going in style. And I don't want people to judge me or think I'm poor. Well, what does it matter? It gets me from point A to point B. It's working. I don't have a car payment. Great. People think I'm weird. A lot of Christians think I'm weird. But ultimately, is that not what Jesus is calling us to shine light? That I don't need a car to be fulfilled and to find my identity? Isn't that it? Then he goes to chapter 7, and this is the last one. He says, watch how you judge others. Don't do it, actually. And this idea of judgment, he's not talking about this cute phrase that many people in my generation use, don't judge me, only God can judge me. That's cute. That's not what he's talking about. What he's talking about is condemning people. Condemning them to an eternity away from God. People condemning them based on their actions. He's not talking about not evaluating people's actions. We're allowed, according to the Apostle Paul, to judge each other's actions, to evaluate, to make sure people are actually living out and showing fruit of the gospel in their lives. We're allowed to do that. What we are not allowed to do is to condemn people. Even John 3:17 says, Jesus came into the world not to condemn it, but to save it. So if Jesus isn't condemning the world, why would you think that you and I have the right to judge? So he says, don't judge. But what he means is, don't condemn. Chapter 5, 6, and 7 is full of practical, everyday living out stuff. And do you see where the context is, where he's asking you to live out light? In your relationship, in your marriage. Your relationship when it comes to the opposite sex, the way that you look at them, your value of them because they're made in the image of God. The way that you interact with other people in your emotional regulation. The way you interact with God, that you actually want God and not just recognition. That money can't enslave you, that it has to be about trusting that God has got you. That's how we show light to the world, church. That's what being light in the middle of darkness looks like. Because let's be honest, the rest of this, all of this, 5, 6, and 7, the world is not living this out. The average Canadian household debt is like something like $66,000. And that is just consumer debt. People aren't living this out. Not trusting God. They're trusting the banks and the credit cards. But Jesus says that you and I are the light of the world. We are the difference makers. We are the ones that, when inserted, can bring illumination to a society that is around us. That is a big task. It's a big responsibility, but that is what Jesus has handed to you and I. And not in the flamboyant ways that we so wish. I would just wish God would use me and, like put me on a Billy Graham pedestal. No. He never says that in any one of these things, does he? He says you can shine light in your marriage. You can shine light in your relationships. You can shine light in your attitudes about money. You can shine light in even our relationship between you and me. You can shine light in all these spaces. Author, teacher, evangelist, his name is John Stott. He writes this, and I think it's one of the most convicting quotes I've ever read. He says, our Christian habit is to bewail the world's deteriorating standard with an air of rather self-righteousness, or self-righteous dismay. We criticize its violence, dishonesty, immorality, disregard for human life, and materialistic greed. The world is going down the drain, we say, with a shrug. But whose fault is it? Who is to blame? Let me put it like this. If the house is dark when nightfall comes, there is no sense in blaming the house. That is what happens when the sun goes down. The question to ask is, where's the light? Just so, if society deteriorates and its standards decline until it becomes like a dark night, there's no sense in blaming society. That is what happens when fallen men and women are left to themselves and human selfishness is unchecked. The question to ask is, where is the church? Why are the salt and light of Jesus Christ not permeating and changing our society? I know you feel it like I feel it. I know you look at the news. I know you look at all of the stuff happening in the world. I know you look at the things happening even in our own city. And you think, oh my, like the world is just going to hell in a handbasket. That's what it feels like. It feels, you can feel the darkness. You know that it's there. But Jesus' call, or Jesus' commission to his people, is not to just wait for him to come in and to shine things out. He said that you and I are the light of the world. You and I are the ones that are supposed to go in and illuminate. You and I are the ones that are supposed to step into dark places and show people a better way to live and also the way to God. Is it terrifying? Absolutely. Is it going to be hard? Yes. Are there days where it's not going to go so well? Absolutely. But what's the alternative? There is this belief that people that are far away from God, unless they even hear about the good name of Jesus, don't even have the opportunity then to come into this beautiful relationship with God. Like, we believe that people that are far away from God are going to spend eternity away from him. What's the alternative unless we're shining? These people are literally walking around in the dark, knocking their shins and breaking their toes because they're trying to figure out a way out. And here we are, light. It takes 8 minutes and 20 seconds for us to know if the sun went out. And here's my question to you today. How long would it take for the people in your circle of influence and in your life to know if your light went out? Would they even notice? If you and I are holding light that illuminates and causes people to see for the first time in their lives, why would we ever put a bushel or a basket over it and hide it? My dad came to the Lord a little bit later in life. I mean, he's in his 30s. And to this day, one of the things that he remembers is being a kid in Singapore. And in Singapore, I mean, you have various religions and people of various faiths and backgrounds living there. Here is this Sikh family living in this neighborhood amongst Buddhist families and, all kinds of different folks. And there was one Christian family in the surrounding area that he recognized. He knew they were Christians. I mean, probably saw them go to church and all that other stuff. But one day, the wife in this home saw that it was a very hot day and there were construction workers just on the outside. And she took a tray full of water and glasses and went up to these men. She doesn't know their background. She doesn't know what their idea of modesty and, interaction with women is. I mean, she has no idea what's going on. All she knows is that here are some people that are probably very warm because it's a very hot day, and she takes water to them and gives it to them. They drink it, put the glasses back on. She goes back in the house, and that's it. But to this day, my dad remembers that. And that was a seed that God used to eventually bring him into a knowledge of Jesus. We want to try to figure out the big stuff. We want to be part of the global movements that change everything. Jesus in 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew does not talk about global movements. He says the things that fuel global movements are small actions. Are little everyday things. The way that you interact with your loved ones. The way that you interact with people in your life that like you and don't like you. The way that you think about money. The way that you think about God. The way that you interact, your motivations around why it is that you're doing things. He says that's what is actually going to change the world. He doesn't set out this big campaign to go overtake the world by a good branding strategy. He says, here are the things that I want you to do that will shine light. That will cause you to be salt and light to the world. 8 minutes, 20 seconds for us to know that the sun went out. Again, the question is this. How long would it take for somebody in your life to know that your light went out? And if you're here today and you don't know Jesus, you're exploring this whole Christian thing, you think, well, I feel like I'm in the dark. I feel like I've been rolling around and trying to find my way out. I've been bumping my shins and breaking my toes. I don't know where to go. Jesus describes himself in the Bible as the light of the world. And here in this community, we are also the light of the world. And if you're here and you've never, ever even thought of a relationship with Jesus, or it's something that you're curious about starting, we would love for you to text the word journey to 555-888. One of our pastors is going to get a hold of you and talk with you about what it would look like to join an Alpha Home Group. To begin the journey of understanding the Bible and who this God is. And listen, I'm going to tell you right off the cuff, if one of your hang-ups is that Christians have hurt you, well, I'm sorry. We're imperfect people just trying to do our best, and we make mistakes too. But I pray and I hope that a Christian that has said something ridiculous to you or done something ridiculous to you is not going to hold you back from seeing the good God that we serve. So if that's you, text 555-888, the word journey, to that number. For the rest of us, this week, let's go be light. Let's understand that the movement of Christianity is not based on the big things. It's based on little things on a volume basis. That you and I have the opportunity to literally change the very culture, atmosphere, temperament of our world if we would just step in and let our light shine. Let me pray for you. Jesus, thank you for your incredible grace and mercy to us. Father, today I pray that we would be challenged to leave this place and to go and be light. Be light with one another, but also be light with the world around us. Jesus, there are people in our lives that we love so desperately. We want them to come to a knowledge of Christ. But maybe, perhaps, we are the ones that have been in the way of them doing that. Help us, Lord, to be emitters of your light. Help us, Lord, to be people who shine so brightly that we illuminate a path to a better way for other people. Help us be so bright in the way that we shine that people get to see the splendor of the God that we love. We love you, we trust you, we pray these things in Jesus' name.